Welcome to the turn of night. The 24-hour bus was on time for a change. It was on a post-work commute that a young male passenger looked up from his phone screen to notice a group of people boarding. They didn't seem to know each other. However, a young, attractive woman didn't seem to be noticed by anyone else. Perhaps it was his own sense of restlessness that he glanced up at this young lady. The vehicle itself seemed to be slow, and the lights appeared almost dimmer as she strode through the aisle. He felt entranced for a moment as she made eye contact with him. Returning his gaze to his phone, he tried to appear as if he'd innocently been looking around. He also couldn't help feeling that something was off about the young woman who caught his eye. So much for playing it cool, she had stopped right next to him. Their eyes met. Hers were more alive and fierce than any others he'd seen. She spoke to him. "Are you having a nice evening?" He replied that he had just left work. She smiled and looked at him, almost seductively, yet with an air of danger. She asked if he lived close by, to which he fumbled out the words, explaining that he had an apartment 2 stops north of the next main intersection. She proclaimed to him that she wasn't quite renting, just borrowing for the night. He asked if that meant she was staying at a friend's or at an Airbnb. She threw her head back and laughed almost maniacally at his question. "Just borrowing for the night," was her reply. As his stop approached, he suddenly remembered that when she boarded, she produced no card, pass, transfer, or even paid a cash fare. She moved back and forth, a few feet up and down the aisle with her arms out to her sides. No one else seemed to see her. His attention to this lady, shrouded in dark clothing, broke when his stop was announced. He nodded his head and bid her a good evening. He turned and walked the few steps to the exit doors, but she was close behind him. The doors opened, and he and 2 other passengers exited the bus. The doors were about to close, but she was right there behind him again. "Do you want to have fun?" she asked him. There was more to her voice, an almost subsonic quality to it, and it made him feel very uneasy. He slowly turned to face her, even though he was uncomfortable in doing so. He quickly and disjointedly offered that he had to go home. As he faced her one last time, she had her hand outstretched as if to take his. He thought the streetlight must have been causing an illusion of some sort, as her outline seemed to extend past that of a normal being. He turned and swiftly walked towards his home. He could feel her presence, even though when he glanced back one last time, she remained still, her eyes staring through him, her hand still outstretched. As he turned the corner to his street, he swore that he saw her in the distance, almost gliding, rather than walking like a person would. Once home, fatigue suddenly hit him as if he was drained. Perhaps it was the stress of the work week, but certainly not the encounter he'd just had. He went to sleep with the idea that anything more than the 40-hour work week, plus daily commuting time, was what did him in. He dreamed that night of shadows and voices calling for a celebration he wanted no part of. He awoke at 11 in the morning. After a cup of coffee and a shower, he planned on a walk to the local cafe for a cup to go, plus a pastry to tide him over until lunch. As he entered and walked to the counter, he noticed a group of people, all different in age and ethnicity. They seemed to be comforting someone. It was the young lady from the bus who he'd met last night. She appeared different, vulnerable, very much human, as opposed to her visage of when they'd first met. She was being consoled by these strangers. As the barista handed him his coffee, he overheard her cry that there were 4 of them, each with distinct voices. Assuming that she'd been the victim of a street assault the night before, he paused to listen further. An older lady softly spoke to her. "We understand what you have just been through. We've all been borrowed by them." The other people nodded in unison as the lady continued to speak. "It happens on this street, on this day, to someone new every year. That is why we gather. There are more than 20 of us. You are not alone." The lights are on as the evening shadows are creeping in. Hopefully, you won't get caught in the turn of night.